7 bridegrooms entered the same room, one after another, and every one of them died before sunrise. Not in battle, not in public, not under a curse anyone could see. They crossed the threshold of a wedding chamber, felt the warm darkness close around them, and then something without a body reached for the soft tube in the throat and shut the air off. The strangest part is not that an ancient story remembered 7 bodies. The strangest part is that the one man who survived did not survive because he was braver, holier, or protected by a shining angel with a sword. He survived because he carried a piece of dead fish into the room, burned its organs over hot coals, and turned a wedding night into a chemical attack. That is the version of the story most people never hear, because it sounds less like religion and more like quarantine. If you're watching this late, somewhere in the States, drop your state or city and the local time below. I want to know who else is sitting in the dark with this story. The Book of Tobit is often softened into something almost charming. A pious old father, a dutiful son, a mysterious traveling companion, a bride rescued from a demon, a fish, a dog, a happy ending. It can be told like a folk tale, the kind of story that sits quietly between moral instruction and family adventure. But that version survives only because centuries of later readers learned how to sand the bone edges smooth. Beneath the devotional surface, the older anatomy of the tale is colder, wetter, and far more frightening. It is not a story about magic defeating evil. It is a story about a world where evil behaves like an organism, where the invisible has habits, triggers, territories, and chemical vulnerabilities. And once you notice that, the entire narrative changes shape. The proof hides in the way the story survives. Tobit comes down to us through different textual bodies: Aramaic fragments from Qumran, Greek recensions, Latin translations, each one carrying the tale through another layer of memory. That may sound like the dry business of scholars, but for this story, textual transmission is like an autopsy report. Later religious imagination often beautifies what earlier material leaves raw. The older forms preserve strange physical details that a smoother legend might have removed. The dog, the fish organs, the exact order of smoke before prayer, the verb for strangling. These are not decorative fragments. They are the splinters left in the wound. If you pull them out and line them up, the charming folk tale turns into a field manual. And field manuals do not care whether the operation feels dignified. They care whether the patient lives. That is why the story keeps forcing the audience downward, away from polished metaphysics and into bodies. Eyes cloud with white films, feet enter river mud, hands grip a thrashing animal, organs are carried in a bag, smoke enters lungs, a demon flees through odor. Everything that matters touches matter. The sacred does not arrive by lifting the characters out of the physical world. It arrives by making the physical world usable. That is the first warning Tobit gives us, and it will become more disturbing when the demon finally has to breathe the cure. The Old Text does not introduce Asmodeus as a grand satanic emperor seated on a throne of flame. He is not given a palace, a manifesto, or a cosmic philosophy. He does not bargain with kings. He does not offer forbidden wisdom. He does not even speak. That silence matters. In later demonology, demons perform. They announce themselves. They tempt, possess, debate, seduce, and boast. Asmodeus in Tobit does none of this. He behaves less like a character than a lethal environmental condition. He is there. He waits. He reacts. And if a certain biological pattern unfolds in the room where Sarah sleeps, he kills. That is not the behavior of a villain in a drama. It is the behavior of a trap. Even his name points away from personality and toward force. Asmodeus is tied to Eshma Deva, a Persian storm of meaning that gathers wrath, fury, blood heat, and demonic power into one title.
But in Tobit, that fury is not universal. It does not spill randomly through streets. It does not strike every male body in Ecbatana. It has a narrow appetite. It is keyed to Sarah. That specialization makes it more frightening, not less. A storm can be fled if you see the clouds. A territorial pathogen can hide inside ordinary life until the exact temperature, proximity, and desire wake it. This is why calling it jealousy is both correct and insufficient. Human jealousy imagines a rival and reacts with story. Asmodeus reacts with mechanics. The bridegroom is not hated as a person. He is rejected as an intrusion into a closed system. In that sense, the demon's violence resembles an immune response gone insane, defending the host by destroying the host's future. Ancient people would not have used that language, but they understood the pattern. Something can protect what it possesses so completely that protection becomes a form of murder. Sarah lives at the center of that contradiction, and every wedding proves it again. Sarah, daughter of Ragiel, lives in Ecbatana, far from the old grief of Tobit in Nineveh, but the two households are already connected by a kind of invisible pressure. The distance between them is filled with heat, dust, road noise, and the slow, grinding machinery of kinship obligation. In Ecbatana, Sarah's home should be a place of music, bread, oil lamps, and marriage negotiations whispered behind curtains. Instead, it has become a sealed medical wing around a woman no physician can treat. The house still breathes like a normal house. Servants move through corridors. A father receives visitors. A mother measures risk by the tone of footsteps. But every person inside knows there is one room where the air has a memory of men dying. Sarah is usually called cursed, but curse is too clean a word. A curse suggests language, intention, a sentence spoken and sealed. What clings to Sarah is more intimate. She is not merely afflicted. She has been made into territory. Her body has become a border marker for something that refuses every rival claim. The demon's violence is not scattered through the city. It does not sweep through markets, slaughter soldiers, or set fields on fire. It waits for bridegrooms. It waits for the moment a man crosses from legal arrangement into flesh. Then it answers with the precision of a reflex. This is where the story becomes almost unbearably modern. The horror is not that Sarah is surrounded by superstition. The horror is that everyone around her has observed the pattern accurately, and nobody knows how to break it. Imagine the first wedding, the courtyard lit by lamps, the women moving with bowls and veils, the smell of roasted grain, sweat, wine, and smoke caught under the ceiling beams. The groom's hands probably smelled of oil from the ritual preparations. Sarah may have sat with her eyes lowered, hearing the scrape of sandals outside the chamber, hearing people force cheer into their voices because families are very good at pretending terror has not entered the room. Then the door closed. The crowd outside waited for the private mystery that turns contract into marriage, but inside, the room cooled. The groom's breath changed. Something tightened. There may not have been a scream, because strangulation steals the sound before it can become human. By morning, the house had learned a new law. The second wedding would have been different. You can hold ignorance only once. After the first death, every celebration becomes an experiment everyone is ashamed to admit they are conducting. The same lamps burn, but their light is jaundiced. The same incense is lit, but now its sweetness catches in the throat.
People smile with their mouths and calculate with their eyes. The bride is not the only one being watched. So is the groom. So is the door. So is the hour when silence should become proof of life. By the third wedding, the story is no longer tragedy. It is data. By the seventh, Ecbatana knows the chamber as a killing room. 7 men have entered. 7 men have failed to leave alive. The number matters because the ancient mind heard 7 as completion, fullness, a thing brought to the edge of meaning. But the psychological reality is harsher than symbolism. 7 families have buried sons. 7 bridal beds have become mortuary slabs. 7 times, Sarah has survived the night and awakened into an accusation no one has to speak aloud. In a culture where marriage and fertility carry social weight heavier than stone, she becomes the impossible woman. Not because she refuses marriage, but because marriage dies when it approaches her. The older Greek wording makes the deaths more physical than a simple phrase like killed would allow. The verb behind the scene points toward choking, strangling, drowning, the suppression of breath. The old Latin memory moves in the same direction, with a term of suffocation. This matters because the demon does not stab, burn, or tear. It closes the airway. It takes the most ordinary rhythm in the body and interrupts it from the inside. Breath is the boundary between life and panic, between speech and silence, between a human face and a body going slack. Asmodeus does not merely end lives, it makes the first act of life impossible to continue. So the chamber carries a specific terror. A man can defend himself against a blade if he sees the hand. He can run from fire if he smells smoke early enough. But what weapon do you raise against invisible pressure on the throat? The victim might reach for his neck and find nothing there. He might claw at empty air while Sarah watches the room kill again. That image changes Sarah's torment. She is not only a survivor after the fact, she may have been a witness to the mechanics. The body thrashing, the face darkening, the sudden animal desperation of a man who cannot inhale. And then, mourning. Always mourning. There is a cruel pattern in communities under unexplained threat. They begin by fearing the danger. Then they start resenting the person nearest to it. Sarah's servant girl says the quiet part aloud, accusing her of killing her husbands. It is the kind of accusation that does not need evidence because grief wants a body it can point to. The room kills, but the room cannot be shamed. The demon kills, but the demon cannot be dragged into the courtyard. Sarah can. So the pressure of 7 funerals turns toward the one person who has survived all 7, as if survival itself were proof of guilt. That is the detail most retellings underplay. Sarah is not simply waiting to be rescued. She is being psychologically compressed from both sides by a demon that will not release her, and the community that cannot forgive her for still breathing. Her despair is not romantic melancholy. It is the body's final accounting after too many mornings of being treated like the common denominator in other people's graves. The rope becomes thinkable. The beam becomes thinkable. The silence after death becomes, for one exhausted moment, a kind of peace. But she does not do it, and that refusal matters more than courage. It is not triumph. It is one last thin thread of obligation. A daughter refusing to leave her father with the shame of her death. At nearly the same time, in Nineveh, an old man named Tobit sits in another house under another form of siege. He is blind, disgraced, and tired. His blindness begins with an almost grotesque accident, the kind that feels too small to carry theological weight. Bird droppings fall into his eyes while he rests in a courtyard, and the white films that follow cloud his vision until the world becomes a smear of heat and voice. The story does not give him a grand battlefield wound. It gives him contamination, waste from the sky, a corrosive accident, a body betrayed by matter. That is important, because Tobit and Sarah are not joined by romance or plot convenience. They are joined by the same terrifying principle. In this universe, the spiritual crisis enters through biology. Tobit has been righteous in ways that should have protected him, at least according to the moral logic people prefer. He has buried the dead. He has honored the law. He has tried to remain clean in exile. But righteousness does not stop the droppings from falling. It does not reverse scar tissue. It does not keep poverty from entering the house like a cold draft through bad stonework. His wife works. His pride curdles. His patience thins. He becomes the kind of suffering man who can still quote virtue while wounding the people who love him. And finally, like Sarah, he prays for death. This is the moment where the story's machinery wakes up. Two prayers rise from two houses in two cities, not as polished hymns but as distress signals. One comes from a blind old man whose world has narrowed to darkness and dependence. The other comes from a young woman surrounded by the ghosts of 7 husbands and the social smell of scandal. They do not know each other is praying. They do not know their miseries are being braided. But the text frames these prayers as simultaneous, as if heaven receives them not as separate requests, but as one diagnostic reading. The infection is systemic. The answer must travel. And the answer is Raphael. But even this has been misread. Later imagination wants an archangel to enter like weather, blinding the wicked, splitting the air, announcing rescue in flame. Tobit gives us something stranger. Raphael arrives under cover. He does not descend before Sarah with a sword. He does not stand over Tobit and heal him with a gesture. He puts on an ordinary human identity. Azarias, son of Ananias, a useful relative, a guide for hire, a man who knows the roads. The divine response to a demon is not spectacle. It is infiltration. That detail is the key to the whole operation. Raphael has authority, but he does not simply use force. His mission is instructional. He will not do for Tobias what Tobias must learn to do inside matter, with his own hands. That is a grim theology, but a consistent one. The cosmos does not treat the human being as a passive rescued object. It treats him as a trainee in a hostile ecosystem. Raphael will walk beside Tobias, eat in appearance, speak in ordinary tones, and keep his true nature sealed behind skin. He will not remove the danger from the road. He will convert the danger into equipment. Even the alias is a clue disguised as paperwork. Azarias carries the sense of divine help. Ananias carries the sense of divine grace. Raphael chooses a name that tells the truth while hiding the scale of it. That is how deep cover works. The disguise does not have to be false in every detail. It only has to be small enough for human beings to tolerate. If Raphael had appeared in unveiled form, Tobias would have been overwhelmed by the messenger and might have missed the method. Instead, the angel compresses himself into the social shape of a relative, a guide, a hireable man with road knowledge. He becomes credible before he becomes miraculous. Later, when he explains that his eating was only appearance, the detail feels eerie rather than comforting. It means the party spent days with someone whose body was a readable surface. Not a limitation. Tobias heard him chew, saw him share the road, perhaps watched firelight moving over a face that was never fully what it seemed. There is something unnerving about that kind of mercy. Raphael does not lie to harm them. He disguises himself so the operation can proceed at human speed. The angel's humility is not softness. It is discipline. He lowers the voltage of heaven until it can pass through an ordinary journey without burning the travelers alive. Tobias does not yet understand any of this. To him, the journey begins as a family obligation. Tobit remembers money deposited far away in Media and sends his son to retrieve it. On the surface, this is an errand. Beneath the surface, it is a guided movement toward a contaminated house. Tobias sets out with a stranger, a dog, and the heavy trust of a blind father. The road from Nineveh toward Media is not a painted map. It is heat on the back of the neck, grit between teeth, leather stiff with sweat, insects whining in the dusk, and the soft padding of the dog moving at the edge of firelight. Every mile teaches the body that survival is not an idea. It is maintenance. The dog is easy to dismiss until you remember how often ancient stories place animals at the border between visible and invisible danger. The dog in Tobit does not deliver speeches or alter the plot. And that is why the detail feels old. It is too unnecessary to be decorative. It trots with the party like a biological sensor, ears catching what human ears miss, nose reading the dark in layers of rot, water, fur, and fear. In Persian and Mesopotamian imagination, dogs could stand near the unclean edge and detect what people could not name. Whether the animal sees the unseen or simply intensifies the journey's realism, its presence changes the texture of the expedition. This is not a clean pilgrimage. This is a small moving unit with an animal alarm system. The journey's first true test comes at the Tigris. The river is not a metaphor when Tobias steps into it. It is cold around the ankles, slick over stones, alive with mud and current. The air near the bank smells of reeds, wet clay, fish oil, and the faint mineral breath of moving water. After days of dust, the river must feel like relief. Tobias goes down to wash his feet, and for 1 second the body trusts the world. Then the water opens. The creature lunges for him from below. The old translations call it a fish, but the scene does not behave like a quaint fish story. This is an ambush. A mass surges through brown water, mouth and muscle and impact, aiming for the foot, because the foot is the first human part surrendered to the river. Tobias feels not theology, but panic. The animal burst of the nervous system when something unseen touches the body with intent. Water slaps against his legs. Stones slide under him. The dog's bark tears through the bank air. Raphael does not vaporize the predator. He does not reveal wings. He commands Tobias to seize it and hold on. That command is brutal. It forces the young man to become intimate with the thing trying to injure him. Not flee it, not pray it away. Grip it. Drag it from its own element. The fish thrashes against his hands, slick as oiled rope, heavy with river power. Its scales rasp skin. Its gills pump. Its body hammers the mud in violent arcs, flinging water that tastes of silt and blood. The whole scene collapses the distance between miracle tale and survival horror. Tobias is not learning that God removes monsters. He is learning that sometimes the monster is the supply crate. This is Raphael's pedagogy. The predator becomes payload. The attack becomes acquisition. Once the creature is subdued, Raphael instructs Tobias to cut it open and remove the gall, the heart, and the liver. The words are medical, almost impersonal, but the act would not have been. A blade opens the belly. Heat leaves the body in steam. The smell rises fast, metallic and swampy. a dense, wrought, sweet vapor of blood, bile, and river flesh. Tobias reaches into the warm cavity and separates organs by touch. Gall slick and bitter, heart muscular and dark, liver heavy, glossy, packed with the chemistry of life. Raphael does not ask him to preserve a symbol. He asks him to preserve matter. This is where the older world presses through the story. In Mesopotamian practice, healing and exorcism were not cleanly separated. The specialist who treated affliction might be part physician, part ritual technician, part chemist of the sacred. Smoke mattered, bitterness mattered, odor mattered. Bodies contained powers that could be redirected. Modern readers often split medicine from magic because modern categories demand separate rooms. But in the world behind Tobit, a substance could be pharmacological and supernatural without contradiction. If bile could burn the films from blind eyes, perhaps liver and heart could burn a demon out of the air. This is also why the fish is not merely a strange animal. In the cultural waters around the story, fish-shaped beings and fish-cloaked sages carried associations with ancient knowledge. The Apkallu, those old Mesopotamian figures of wisdom, often appear wrapped in the body of a fish, as if civilization itself once climbed out of deep water wearing scales. Whether Tobit consciously invokes that entire tradition, or simply breathes the same air, the resonance is powerful. Knowledge comes from the river. Medicine comes from a predator. The thing that lunges from below becomes the teacher's toolkit. The exorcistic logic of smoke has its own deep history. In Mesopotamian rituals of burning and combustion, evil could be driven, constrained, or undone through the manipulation of substances in fire. To modern eyes, smoke is atmosphere. To the ancient ritual imagination, smoke is transport. It carries odor, heat, particles, command, disgust. It crosses thresholds a hand cannot cross. It occupies a room faster than a person can speak. A demon that feeds through subtle contact with the human world can be attacked through the same subtle medium. Raphael is not improvising. He is giving Tobias a precise technology of atmosphere. The fish organs are not random. The gall belongs to Tobit's eyes. The heart and liver belong to Sarah's chamber. One creature yields two cures, one for a father's blindness and one for a bride's captivity. That symmetry is too precise to be accidental. The journey has not produced an object. It has produced a protocol. And Tobias, though he still does not fully understand the design, now carries the ancient equivalent of a biological weapons kit in his travel sack. The road continues, but the story has crossed a threshold. Before the river, Tobias was a son retrieving money. After the river, he is a carrier of volatile medicine moving toward a demon that kills by breath. Raphael knows this. The dog may know something is wrong before the humans do. Tobias only knows the organs must be kept, the flesh salted, the instructions remembered. But every step toward Ecbatana now has a hidden rhythm. The parasite waits in a bedroom. The antidote swings in a sack. And somewhere between them, a wedding is being prepared like an autopsy. When Raphael finally tells Tobias about Sarah, he does not describe her first as a danger. He describes her as kin, rightful wife, part of the family line. That matters because the story never allows Sarah to remain merely contaminated. She is a person before she is a case. But the case is horrifying. Raphael tells Tobias about the 7 husbands. He tells him what happens to men who approach her, in effect.
that the path of obedience leads directly into a room with a perfect mortality record. This is the point where a sane man would turn back. There are many forms of courage in ancient stories. But Tobias's courage is peculiar because it must pass through disgust before it reaches faith. He has to remember the fish organs. He has to imagine burning them near a woman on a wedding night. He has to trust a stranger's instructions over the evidence of 7 corpses. The mind can believe in divine help from a distance. It is harder to believe while carrying dried viscera toward a bed where other men have died. Raphael's explanation is not sentimental. He gives a sequence. When Tobias enters the bridal chamber, he must take the heart and liver from the fish and place them on the embers of incense. The smoke will rise. The demon will smell it and flee. Only then will Tobias and Sarah pray. That order is everything. Later retellings often prefer to center the prayer because it feels spiritually safer, but the narrative sequence is sharper. First, fumigation, then prayer. First, the environment must be made uninhabitable to the parasite. Then the marriage can become covenant. The city of Ecbatana receives Tobias with the surfaces of hospitality. Doors open. Kinship is recognized. Raguel, Sarah's father, embraces him with the heavy relief and dread of a man who sees both answer and corpse in the same young face. Edna, Sarah's mother, moves inside the unbearable tension that only parents know, when hope itself becomes dangerous. Food is prepared. Legal arrangements unfold. Words of welcome fill the air, because ancient households know how to keep ritual moving, even when terror sits at the table. But under the hospitality, Raguel is already measuring the grave. That is one of the darkest human details in the entire story. He does not refuse Tobias. He does not end the arrangement. He gives Sarah to him, and then, expecting the familiar pattern, orders a grave dug during the night. The sound of that digging may be the most frightening sound in Tobit. Not the demon, not a scream. The shovel. Earth cut in the dark before the body exists. Men working quietly outside so the household can conceal another catastrophe if morning brings the 8th dead husband. The soil would be cool beneath the surface, clumping around the blade. The night air would smell of dust, sweat, and opened ground. Every thrust of the shovel says the same thing. We have done this before. Inside the house, Sarah is prepared again for marriage. What does a woman become after 7 wedding nights end in death? The story does not give her an interior monologue, so we have to read the architecture of the moment. She has learned that a bride can be treated like a promise and a weapon in the same breath. She has learned that men's desire can approach her with ceremony and then leave as a body. She has learned that every new husband enters not only her room, but the accumulated air of the previous 7. She may hope. She may dread hope more than death. Both would make sense. Tobias enters the chamber knowing enough to fear it. The door closes. The room holds the layered smells of bedding, oil, old plaster, and incense coals. Firelight trembles against walls that have witnessed too much. Sarah is there, living, silent, carrying a history no wedding song can erase. Tobias does not move first toward her. That restraint may save his life. Desire is the trigger. The demon has killed at the threshold where possession, lust, and consummation converge. Tobias instead moves toward the heat source. He remembers Raphael's words. In his sack are the preserved organs of the Tigris predator. Think of the physical absurdity of it. A bridegroom on his wedding night, reaching not for his bride, but for dried heart and liver cut from a river beast. The pieces would be stiff, oily, and dark.
Their surface is changed by travel, their smell concentrated into something sour and animal. He places them on the incense coals. The room changes immediately. Heat takes the tissue first. Fat loosens. Fibers blacken. Moisture trapped in the organs hisses into vapor. The smoke rises thick. Not like perfumed offering, but like a foul chemical bloom. Burned fish, scorched blood, bitter oil, and mineral ash flood the chamber. It would coat the tongue. It would sting the eyes. It would cling to hair and cloth. Sarah breathes it. Tobias breathes it. But the intended target is something that should not have lungs, and yet somehow can be driven by odor. That is the terrifying metaphysics of this story. The demon is invisible, but not unreachable. It has an interface with the physical world. It can kill through the throat, and it can be wounded through the air. Asmodeus activates too late. For 7 husbands, the sequence belonged to the demon. Entry. Desire. Compression. Death. The chamber had become a machine that turned weddings into corpses. But Tobias reverses the order. Entry, ignition, toxic aerosol, expulsion. The predator of the room meets the predator of the river, not as animals, but as chemistries. The demon that suffocates men encounters a cloud that suffocates the demon's hold on the world. This is not clean victory. It is not shining holiness. It is a reek so violent that evil loses its grip. The text says the odor hinders the demon, and Asmodeus flees to the remotest parts of Egypt. That single sentence contains an entire unseen catastrophe. Imagine an entity that has held Sarah's life in a territorial lock for years, suddenly torn from its host by a smell it cannot endure. No speech, no curse, no final threat. Just panic, recoil, flight. The tether snaps. The room that belonged to it becomes poison. It runs. Notice how humiliating this defeat is. The demon that killed men at the height of bridal expectation is not conquered in the posture of grandeur. It is routed by stench. It is driven out by the kind of smell people instinctively wave away from their faces. That humiliation is not incidental. It attacks the prestige later demonology tries to give such beings. Asmodeus does not receive a throne. It receives nausea. It receives the smoke of a butchered river animal. It receives the reminder that even a non-human terror can have a weak point so primitive that a human nose can almost understand it. And Tobias does not need to understand the physics fully for the physics to work. This is one of the hardest lessons in the narrative. Modern people often think action must wait for comprehension, but emergencies rarely grant that luxury. Tobias has a sequence, not a theory. Remove the organs, preserve them, burn them on the coals. Pray after. Live until morning. The demon's defeat depends on obedience to the pattern before the mind can domesticate the pattern. That is why the chamber feels less like a temple and more like a laboratory under fire. Only after this does Tobias turn to Sarah in prayer. That order does not diminish the prayer. It clarifies it. Prayer is not used as an incantation to manipulate the demon. Prayer becomes the first human act possible after the environment has been cleared. Tobias and Sarah ask that their union not be governed by lust alone, but by sincerity, mercy, and kinship. In the logic of the narrative, that matters because Asmodeus fed on a corrupted threshold. He policed Sarah's sexuality through death. The prayer reclaims the threshold from appetite and terror. It says, "This body is not your territory. This room is not your trap. This marriage is not your trigger. Outside, the grave waits. Raguel does not sleep like an innocent man. He waits like someone expecting a sound. Dawn approaches with that pale, cold color that makes every object look accused. He sends a maid to check whether Tobias is alive. The moment is almost unbearable because it is so domestic. A servant goes to a door. A household holds its breath. The air smells of last night's smoke, cooling ash, and damp earth from the open grave. If she finds a corpse, the family must move quickly. If she finds life, the entire physics of the house changes. She finds them alive. Raguel's joy is not simple relief. It is the collapse of a pattern so entrenched that he had already prepared the evidence of its continuation. The grave must be filled before anyone sees it. That detail carries shame, comedy, and horror at once. Men who dug a hole for Tobias now cover it because the dead man is not dead. The earth is returned to itself. The secret burial is cancelled. In that rough scraping of soil back into the pit, the old narrative loses its authority. The house that expected another corpse has to learn what survival sounds like. But the demon has not simply vanished into abstraction. It has fled to Egypt, and that destination is not random. In the ancient imagination, Egypt could be empire, memory, wisdom, oppression, and wilderness all at once. But the far reaches of Upper Egypt, the desert edges, the red zones beyond ordinary habitation, carried a different charge. They belonged to heat, barrenness, disorder, and the gods of the margins. A spirit driven from a fertile bridal chamber flees to a landscape that cannot be cultivated. That is more than geography. It is ecological exile. The desert is the perfect opposite of Sarah's room. The chamber was dense with human future. Marriage, fertility, lineage. The social heat of a family trying to continue itself. The far desert is anti-room, a place where walls dissolve into distance and fertility thins into glare. In Egyptian religious imagination, the red lands beyond the ordered world belonged to violence, storm, confusion, and the disruptive power associated with Set. That does not mean Tobit simply borrows an Egyptian god and inserts him into the plot. It means the geography speaks a language ancient listeners could feel. The demon flees toward a landscape that shares its hostility to generative life. There is a physical intelligence to this. If the demon cannot hold Sarah, it retreats to a place where Sarah's meaning cannot follow. No bridal bed, no household, no line of descendants, no courtyard where bread is broken and infants cry. Only heat, sand, stone, and the long, grinding sound of wind moving over emptiness. The demon seeks an environment that does not accuse it by flourishing, but Raphael follows, and the wasteland that looked like refuge becomes a holding cell. This is where Raphael finally acts directly. During the human scene of survival, while Tobias and Sarah breathe in the aftermath, Raphael pursues the weakened demon. The text is stunningly brief. Raphael goes, binds it, shackles it there at once. No duel is described because no duel is needed. The angel has not been waiting for a theatrical confrontation. He has been waiting for Tobias to perform the human part of the protocol. Once the smoke breaks the tether, the entity becomes containable. The operative moves. Try to picture that pursuit without making it too beautiful. Not wings glittering above pyramids, not painted clouds. Think instead of speed, without spectacle. A force crossing distance with clinical intention. Asmodeus retreats through spiritual geography like an injured predator, carrying the stink of burned organs in whatever passes for its senses. It reaches the wastes, where sand rasps against stone, and the day stores heat like iron. There, in a place hostile to ordinary life, Raphael intercepts it. The binding is physical in the language of the story, tied, shackled, restrained. Evil is not persuaded, it is quarantined. This binding echoes a wider apocalyptic grammar. Other ancient texts imagine dangerous beings chained in rough places, buried under stones, cast into darkness, held until a future time. The archangel Raphael is associated elsewhere with binding Azazel, another destructive figure, hand and foot in the desert. That parallel does not make Asmodeus and Azazel the same being. It reveals the office Raphael occupies. He is not merely a healer in the gentle modern sense. He is the one who restores by restraint. Healing, in his portfolio, includes immobilizing what should never have been allowed to roam. That is a severe idea of mercy. Mercy for Sarah means violence against the thing attached to her. Mercy for the household means captivity for the force that made the household dig graves. There are forms of compassion that look like comfort, and forms that look like chains. Raphael belongs to the second kind. He does not ask Asmodeus to understand the pain it caused. He binds it before it can create another case. The desert receives the shackle, and the marriage chamber exhales for the first time in years. That word, quarantine, may be the best modern key to the story. The demon is not converted, it is not forgiven, it is not debated into harmlessness. It is contained in a place where it can no longer reach the host. Ancient apocalyptic traditions often imagine rebellious spirits bound in deserts, pits, or darkness, not because those places are decorative, but because containment requires geography. A dangerous force must be relocated outside the human zone. The bridal chamber is cleared. The wasteland receives what the house cannot survive. Meanwhile, the human story has to continue, because survival is never the end of contamination. The stink lingers. The bodies are still buried. Sarah still remembers. Raguel still knows he dug that grave. Tobias still carries the second half of the fish's medicine. The journey back to Nineveh remains, and with it the old blind father waiting in a darkness that began with bird waste and hardened into despair. The protocol has liberated a bride, but it has not yet opened the eyes of the man who sent his son away. Tobit waits at home with the terrible helplessness of the blind. Waiting changes the sound of a house. Small noises become prophecies. A footstep outside might be a neighbor or a messenger. A dog's bark might be nothing, or the first crack in grief. His wife, Anna, has already endured the practical side of suffering. Work, suspicion, the old man's wounded pride, the long absence of their son. For her, piety has had to share space with bread. The story understands something harsh here. Spiritual men are often hardest on the people who must keep them alive while they suffer. When Tobias returns, the dog runs ahead. That image matters. The animal that traveled through the dangerous middle of the story becomes the first living signal of restoration. Before Raphael reveals himself, before the gall touches the eyes, before theology explains the pattern, the dog arrives with motion and noise. Dust rises. Paws strike the ground. The household hears life before it understands it. In a story so obsessed with unseen forces, the visible body of an animal becomes the announcement that the sun is near. Raphael instructs Tobias to use the fish gall on Tobit's eyes. Again, the cure is tactile, not abstract. Tobias takes the bile, that bitter, caustic residue preserved from the river creature, and applies it to the white films. This is not the gentle miracle of a clean beam of light. It is closer to surgery. The old man's eyes burn. The tissue reacts. The films are rubbed away. The smell would be sharp, oily, and unpleasant. Tobit, who lost sight through contamination, regains it through controlled irritation. Matter wounded him. Matter heals him. The old medical world would not have found that as strange as we do. Fish bile and other animal substances appear in ancient discussions of eye treatment because the eye was understood not only as a symbol of perception, but as a wet, vulnerable organ that could be clouded, burned, scraped, and treated. Tobit's white films are not merely a metaphor for spiritual blindness. They behave like damaged tissue. The cure does not deny the tissue. It confronts it. The gall stings because it must. Restoration is not always soothing at the point of contact. Sometimes healing feels like a second injury with better intention. That may be the quietest cruelty in the whole story. The old man has prayed for death, sent away his son, endured darkness, and now, when the answer reaches him, it burns. He has to submit to the hand of the son he feared lost. He has to endure the chemical bite of the same animal that nearly injured Tobias. He has to trust that pain at the surface of the eye is not destruction returning, but sight fighting its way back. The body often cannot tell the difference at first. It only knows the flame. That symmetry is the story's hidden engine. The same fish that provided smoke against Asmodeus provides bile against blindness. The same journey that carries Tobias toward marriage carries him back toward fatherhood. The same angel who refused to fight the demon prematurely refuses to heal Tobit until the human hands are ready to apply the medicine. Raphael is not minimizing divine power. He is teaching a universe where divine power often arrives as instruction, timing, and the terrifying usefulness of things that smell bad. Tobit's sight returns, and with it the emotional architecture of the family repairs itself. He sees his son. He sees Sarah. He sees the household enlarged rather than emptied. But sight in this story is not only vision. It is recognition. The old man, who has lived inside darkness, must now recognize that the answer to his prayer did not look like rescue when it began. It looked like an errand, a stranger, a dog, a fish attack, a knife, organs, smoke, and delay. That is how the divine moved through the narrative, not as a single being from above, but as a sequence of disgusting necessities. Then Raphael reveals himself. The revelation reframes everything, but it does not erase the road. He tells them he was sent in response to prayer. He tells them, in effect, that they were accompanied by something larger than they understood. But even here, the angel does not allow the humans to retreat into sentimental misunderstanding. He says his eating and drinking were appearances. He was seen as human because they needed him human enough to follow. His disguise was not deception for sport. It was operational mercy. A blazing archangel might inspire awe. A competent guide can teach you how to survive. This is the part of the story that should make every miracle tale feel more dangerous. What if help often arrives too ordinary to recognize? What if the guide beside you is not there to remove the ordeal, but to make sure you harvest it correctly? The modern mind likes rescue narratives because they preserve innocence. Tobit offers something more severe. Innocence does not save Tobias. Training does. Obedience does. The willingness to touch blood, carry viscera, trust timing, and enter the room before the fear has left his body. Sarah's liberation is also more complicated than a happy ending. To say the demon is gone is not to say the memory is gone. 7 men remain dead. 7 wedding nights remain part of her nervous system. A woman can be freed from the force that trapped her and still carry the imprint of the trap. The story does not dwell there, because ancient narratives often move quickly once order is restored. But a documentary imagination has to pause in the afterimage. What did Sarah smell when incense burned later in life? Did smoke ever return her to that chamber? Did a quiet room ever become too quiet? Restoration is real, but it is not amnesia. The same is true of Raguel. He becomes joyful, generous, relieved. But he is also the father who prepared a grave. That is not a moral failure so much as evidence of what repeated catastrophe does to expectation. When a pattern has killed 7 times, realism can look like cruelty. He dug because he believed the world had already spoken. Then morning contradicted him. Many people live this way, preparing graves for outcomes that have not happened yet, because every previous dawn taught them hope was irresponsible. Raguel's hidden wound is that he had become administratively obedient to despair. Tobias, meanwhile, becomes more than dutiful son or lucky bridegroom. He becomes the person in the story who crosses every boundary without fully owning any of them. He moves between father and wife, blindness and sight, river and desert, medicine and exorcism, animal attack and marriage bed. His greatness is not that he understands the whole design. He doesn't. His greatness is that he can act under partial knowledge. This may be the most practical form of faith the story offers, not certainty. Sequence. Do the next instructed thing before the whole map is visible, and Raphael remains the coldest figure of all. Beautiful, yes, in the way an instrument can be beautiful. Merciful, yes, but not soft. He sees Sarah's torment and does not immediately break the demon. He sees Tobit's blindness and does not immediately restore sight. He sees Tobias attacked and does not prevent the lunge. To modern ears, that can sound almost cruel. But within the logic of the story, Raphael is preserving the agency of the human participants. If he solves everything alone, the world remains a place where humans wait helplessly for intervention. Instead, he leaves behind a protocol, a memory of how survival was done. This is why the fish matters so much. Without the fish, the story becomes a simple rescue. With the fish, it becomes a transfer of dangerous knowledge. The river predator is the hinge between prayer and cure. It is the proof that not every attack is only an attack. Some arrive carrying the exact material needed for a later enemy. That does not make suffering good. It makes the world more frightening. Because it suggests that meaning may hide inside events that feel purely hostile while they happen. The greatest irony of Tobit is that the holy solution is almost offensively unholy to the senses. It reeks, it burns, it comes from a gutted animal carried into a wedding chamber. The demon is not defeated by escaping the body, but by taking the body seriously enough to weaponize it. That flips the whole story. Faith does not float above matter here. Faith gets its hands wet, opens the belly of the thing that attacked it, and learns which pieces can still be used. Maybe that is why the story still feels uneasy under the skin. Most of us want deliverance to arrive clean, without odor, embarrassment, or residue. But life rarely separates rescue from the thing we wish had never happened. Sometimes the tool that saves you is something you would rather not touch. Sometimes the person who helps you most will not remove the danger, because they are teaching you how to survive. So here is the question the story leaves open. If you were standing at that door, knowing 7 men had died inside, would you trust Raphael's ugly little protocol and carry the fish heart to the coals? Or would you trust only a cleaner faith and refuse to enter until heaven fought the demon for you? And if that question feels too ancient, follow the demon into the desert. Raphael binds Asmodeus in Egypt. But the text never tells us what the demon experienced in chains, how long the binding lasted, or why old stories send the worst things into wastelands instead of destroying them. That thread leads away from Tobit and into a darker map of watchers, deserts, and buried powers. Once you see it, you notice how many monsters were never killed, only hidden where someone hoped we would stop looking.